Millionaires are leaving China in droves. They're taking their money with them. For the battered Chinese economy, this exodus could spell disaster. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. There was a time, once, when China's economy was booming. And so too did the number of rich Chinese people. It was reported back in 2018 that China was growing so wealthy, so quickly, that it was creating 2 billionaires a week in dollars, not yuan. But despite China being a communist country that suddenly found itself equipped with a surge of wealth, a lot of the prosperity didn't reach the Chinese working class. Which is crazy because every instance of communism throughout history has worked like a charm. Even today, a lot of Chinese laborers are rural migrants, and they don't get to enjoy the same social and economic benefits as established city dwellers. They also increasingly have to resort to protests to get their wages. And even though many of them have 12-hour workdays, 7 days a week, they will never be able to afford retirement. And for those rural Chinese that have chosen to remain in the countryside to farm, things aren't much better, as they might run into this local official screaming at them to pay an exorbitant fee before they can get to work in their fields. Faced with such circumstances, it's not surprising that Chinese emigration rates have only increased in recent years, from around 190,000 in 2019 to more than 300,000 in the past 2 years. What's perhaps more surprising, though, is that the Chinese people that got rich during the super growth years are packing up and skipping town too. Last year, China saw the world's biggest outflow of millionaires, with 13,800 of them leaving the country. And this year, the country is expected to set an exodus record, with 15,200 estimated to depart. So why are they leaving China? Well, while Chinese millionaires are not facing the same injustices as Chinese laborers, the country has become increasingly unattractive for the rich, too. China's economic growth is slowing down. The Chinese property sector that used to be a source of development and prosperity is in a deep crisis, and the Chinese stock market has lost half its value since 2021. At the same time, the Chinese authorities have taken a sledgehammer to industries that used to attract a lot of attention and capital from wealthy Chinese, with crackdowns in such areas as the healthcare industry, the $120 billion private tutoring industry, and its previously booming tech industry. That last one wiped away $1.1 trillion worth of value. But while some Chinese authorities have been busy decimating entire industries, others have gone for a more up-close and personal approach. Last February, well-known tech insider and billionaire Bao Fan suddenly went missing, which, besides fleeing, is the second most common way China loses its wealthy. Days went by before it was announced that he was allegedly cooperating in an investigation being carried out by certain authorities. Then, earlier this year, it came out that Bao had resigned from his own company due to health reasons and in order to spend more time with family. Now, Bao is not the only one who's been snatched up by the Chinese authorities. A long line of business people have disappeared under similar circumstances in recent years. The most notorious case was that of China's richest man and Alibaba founder, Jack Ma. In 2020, he publicly criticized China's financial regulators, and not long after, he went missing. Then, his company was broken up, reshaping his business empire. When he finally reemerged, he had nothing but praise for the changes that the Chinese authorities had forced on his company. In the meantime, his company had decided to invest $15.5 billion in Chinese leaders Xi Jinping's vision of common prosperity. It's always good to see businesses jumping at sound investment opportunity that has nothing whatsoever to do with the authorities locking up the founder. Today, Ma reportedly spends most of his time outside China. I wonder why. The problem is that when wealthy people leave, they have a tendency to take their money with them. For an already battered economy like China's, thousands of millionaires leaving their wealth could deal a pretty heavy blow. China is already burdened by crushing debt, and if billions of dollars worth of capital leave, the financial situation could become even worse. This is something CCP authorities have been concerned about for a long time. In 2015, the Chinese stock market experienced an unprecedented level of turbulence, with the Shanghai stock market plunging 30% in just 3 weeks. Combined with a devaluation of the Chinese yuan, China's currency, the country was suddenly facing a stock market meltdown and a subsequent large-scale flight of capital. So Chinese authorities imposed strict capital controls to prevent wealthy Chinese getting their wealth out of China. It was the economic equivalent of the Berlin Wall. Since then, every Chinese national is only allowed to transfer the equivalent of $50,000 outside the country a year. At the same time, banks and other financial institutions have to report all domestic and overseas cash transactions of more than 50,000 yuan, around $7,200, to the authorities. The issue with capital controls, though, is that they often don't fully solve the problem of capital flight on their own. When Thailand's currency collapsed in 1997, attempts to prevent a capital flight with capital controls had little effect, with the situation instead cascading into a region-wide Asian financial crisis. The same was the case during the Argentine Great Depression from 1998 to 2002, when capital controls failed to halt a massive capital flight fueled by concerns that the country would default on its debt, which it eventually did. To prevent capital flight, capital controls need to be combined with new policies that address the underlying concerns of capital holders. However, given the soaring number of Chinese millionaires leaving China right now, there's clearly very little confidence in policymakers addressing those concerns, to which I say, good. At least someone's paying enough attention to have no confidence in them. And just like in previous cases of capital flight, Chinese millionaires have found ways to get their assets out of China despite strict capital controls, using family members to transfer funds on their behalf. Others have purchased gold bars and then smuggled those out of the country. But many have increasingly turned to networks of underground bankers to launder and move their money. These underground bankers often are part of a wide-ranging system of international facilitators and mediators that enable shadow transfers to take place quickly and smoothly across the globe through a variety of informal channels. A common method employed by Chinese shadow bankers is called smurfing. It involves recruiting Chinese people who have not used their annual $50,000 transfer limit. By recruiting a lot of people into these networks, billions can then be moved abroad. It was reported in 2020 that a guy running such a network, who was busted by Chinese police, was single-handedly running a network of 102 individuals, enabling him to facilitate the transfer of millions of dollars abroad every year. While these underground networks can often move funds far and wide for many Chinese rich people, they really only need their funds to be moved as far as next door Hong Kong. Once the funds are there, they can go anywhere. In fact, Hong Kong is such an open place of business these days that even countries under heavy sanctions like Iran, North Korea, and Russia have been able to move goods in and out of the city-state. Because they don't care about flags. The only color that matters to them is green, or blue, and pink, and yellow. Money. They love money is what I'm getting at. From Hong Kong, one of the prime destinations for Chinese money is Singapore. In fact, Chinese rich people have been so successful at skirting Chinese capital controls and getting their money to Singapore that it's resulted in the establishment of hundreds of wealth management offices in the Southeast Asian city-state. Unfortunately, that's also resulted in a spike in rental prices and forced Singaporean authorities to increase their scrutiny of inbound Chinese wealth. Chinese money has likewise flooded into Thailand and Japan. Chinese money is the biggest thing to spread to other nations from China since COVID. This massive exodus of Chinese millionaires and their millions to other countries reveals a complete lack of faith in Beijing's economic policies, and it should be of major concern to anyone involved with the Chinese economy. So maybe take a cue from China's rich and get out. And maybe send some of that money my way. Support China Uncensored over at patreon.com/China Uncensored. The show barely gets anything from YouTube ad revenue, so we really need your support. And if you give, One of the perks is I'll answer your questions at the end of these episodes. And today's comes from Bruce. Hey, Chris. I've been hearing a lot recently about the Chinese economy no longer poised to overtake the U.S. You've done a great job going over why the Chinese economy is struggling. But do you happen to have any data that shows a long-term projection of the economic growth of China compared to the U.S. and other large economies? I'm wondering if countries like Japan and India might overtake China in the next 30 years. Or is this impossible provided the inaccurate data that the CCP releases? That's a great question for today's episode, Bruce. So yes, like you mentioned, China's economic numbers are all made up. That's not just me saying that. That's what the guy who was in charge of China's economy said. So we really don't know exactly what's going on with China's economy. But when you look at things like the lie flat movement, or even this exodus of China's wealthy, you can see that things are really bad. Things in the US aren't great, but people still choose to come here. No one's fleeing America. China won't become the world's biggest economy, not as long as corruption remains endemic under the CCP rule. So I definitely think we will be seeing the rise of economies like India, eventually catching up and surpassing China's. Thanks for your question and your support, Bruce. YouTube, whose parent company Google has all kinds of interests in China, is not a fan of China Uncensored. So I've taken to hiding controversial topics, like, say, the U.S. defense of Taiwan, in gaming content. Check out this video about the new Final Fantasy game where you need to go defend an island nation from a sinister evil. Absolutely no connection to real-world events. Check it out. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.